Right, let's get started. So hey everybody, my name is Christian, and today I want to talk a little bit about something that we've been working on for the last 2 years almost. So we have an app called CalCentral, and what we did is we actually have AngularJS on the front end, and then we use Rails in the back end. And while we were scaling up, we saw a couple of issues with using like certain approaches. And this is just a presentation about things that we learned, and hopefully you'll take something away from it and use in your own projects as well. So basically the question we were asking ourselves is like, should we have some kind of tight marriage between AngularJS and Rails, or should we actually do some kind of divorce where we separate the two completely? And I'll be discussing both approaches and even like an extra one at the end. What we're actually doing right now is something a little bit more in the middle. So the first one, as I mentioned, like the marriage. So what does that actually mean? So what you do is you actually use the Rails asset pipeline, just the thing that's built in. It's extremely easy and it's just straightforward to use. There's also a couple of like supported gems already where you can just include, Angular gem. And it's just less dependencies. And the basic thing here is that your backend developers are going to love you because they're used to this. But does this really work for the front end as well? That's, of course, the question. So if you're doing this, especially if you're using HTML5 mode in AngularJS, where you don't want that hash bang in your URL, basically what you do is you have a list of all your APIs. And the last line is going to be this one, where you just say, oh, everything that isn't handled by Rails, just let it be handled by the front end. We're using this for 4 pages, 500 pages, the same thing. The other thing I would recommend here is actually using namespacing. So have like /API for everything that's handled in the backend, and then everything else, again, is handled in the front end. The other one is that if you're going for this approach, I would definitely recommend going for this. This really simple line made our development way faster. So what it's going to do by default, if you just have a new Rails project, it's going to load all these assets separately. But with AngularJS, everybody knows you have all these tiny JavaScript files, and it just takes a very long time to actually run in the browser. So what's happened for us is from 214 requests, we came down to 24. Again, this is in development mode, so we have way smaller requests in production. And it brought down our page load time from 13 seconds to 2.5. That does include 5 JSON requests as well. So the other recommendation here is to don't just copy and paste your libraries into your code. I think with Rails 3 it was possible to use something like vendor assets and have that in your own project. But then Rails 4 really discourages that in a good way. So if you have any other dependencies, definitely bundle them as a gem. It makes it way more modular and also way more maintainable. And the nice thing is some of these gems are actually supported by others, so you don't have to maintain them. The first gem that I would recommend using, we actually built this one ourselves. It's extremely easy to update as well. It's called the Angular gem. And the nice thing about this is that you actually are able to, in the assets pipeline, you can actually say in application.js which kind of modules you want. So you just load the Angular core module by default, and then ng route or ng sanitized or ng areas, I guess the new one in 1.3 that they released now as well. If you're going for this approach, where you do have a pretty tight coupling between the two, one gem that made a huge difference for our development team is using the Angular Rails templates. So what this is basically going to do is going to combine all your templates. So you're going to have all .html files, going to combine all of that, put that into the actual JavaScript, and make that part of the $template cache, the Angular template cache. It makes things way faster than before. You don't have to do any extra AJAX calls. And the very nice side benefit of this is that you have a very clean separation between front end and back end. We had certain files that were still doing .erb, where you had some kind of mix between Ruby and HTML templates. So yeah, it was actually good getting away from that. Just maybe a question for the audience, how many people are still using ngmin? Is anybody still using ngmin? No. Okay, so everybody is swapping over to ngannotate. How many people are using that? Okay. So I'm just saying that because if you're using ng-min, like the big difference there is that ng-annotate is just way faster. ng-min is deprecated, so don't use it anymore. And what this is going to be doing is making sure that when you're minifying your files, it's still going to work. Because without it, if you would just like try the first line and you actually minify that, what's going to happen is $scope is going to change to something like A or B. And then AngularJS basically doesn't know anymore what it is. So dependency injection is not going to work anymore. What this gem does is that you don't have to write the second line everywhere, so you don't have to do that duplication yourself. It's just being taken care of. So that's a very nice thing. This gem is one that I wouldn't completely recommend, but again, if you're going for this approach, it does have its benefits. But the thing is not really supported anymore, so it's actually looking for a new maintainer. For us, it still requires a browser extension. You can use something like rack live reload as well, but that didn't really work with our setup. We were using JRuby, and it just didn't work in the latest Rails 4. But I will come up with a better solution soon. So the thing that we discussed now is actually have a very tight coupling, especially on the assets pipeline between AngularJS and Rails. The other suggestion I'm making here is, why don't you do complete separation? So basically what does that mean? Is Rails handles the API, AngularJS basically everything else, right? There's going to be a third option, so hold your breath. So this allows you to use Bower and NPM and just gulp and grunt for building things. And it's really what we as front-end developers want. We don't want to be dependent on the back end. We want to do our own thing. Again, the big pros here is that you have more up-to-date tools. You can use things like Bower again, faster compile times, especially with things like gulp, where you don't have to write things don't have to do a lot of I/O yourself, and image optimization on the fly. So the first package here, browser sync, I hope that's actually the follow-up from LiveRoad. It's, in my opinion, it's way better. LiveRoad was great when it was first there, but we've moved on. So a couple of benefits here. It's built on top of Node.js, which means it's running in Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. We had some issues with LiveRoad, especially on Linux, that didn't work that well. It's also doing style sheet injection. So what does that mean is that it's actually not reloading the complete page anymore. It's just as you're changing your CSS, the only thing it actually does is just injecting the style sheet. What does that mean is that it's just like if you're changing a color, you save a file, only that color is going to be changed on your page. Again, it makes that loop when you're doing development way faster. So that's really cool. The other one is action sync. So this is really cool when you're doing cross-device testing. So basically, when you're scrolling on a page, you can set it that it's like scrolling on all these different devices as well. And this has been really cool just for us. Like we have an Android device, Apple iOS device, and we're running it in the browser all at the same time. And we're just reloading the page, and I can see whether it works or not. Again, my loop is getting way faster. So even if you're not using like Rails or Angular, definitely use this. The next one is gulp-imagemin. Grunt also has a task. My big recommendation here is like if you're using Git or like SVN or any other things like that, make sure to not commit the original files into Git because it's just going to make your Git workflow way slower. Like if you have a lot of binary files that are very big with a lot of history to them, it's just making the checkout and even sometimes creating branches, it just becomes slower. So I guess I want to conclude with, we have this one thing where we can just do like a very tight coupling, a marriage, or we can just have like some kind of divorce. But I think for a lot of projects that already exist there and they're already doing these things, I think it might be okay to just be friends. So what do we mean with that? It's basically the same thing as the divorce, but we're still kind of using the assets pipeline with some niceties to it. And the big reason why we had to do that is because some gems that we're using right now are still depending on the asset pipeline. For instance, Rails admin. So with this one, like gulp-rev, there's probably a lot of people using that, where you would just add a hash to the end of each file. Gulp-rev-rails-manifest is actually going to create a Rails manifest file, which is going to be part of the Rails asset helper, and just making that workflow, again, faster. So, The next one that's, I think, pretty cool as well, it's called gulp-rails. So before, what we had to do is we had to run Rails S, and then we had to open a new tab in the command line where we also did gulp. Basically, what is this doing? As soon as you're starting your server in development mode, it's also going to automatically run gulp. If you want it to be, you can also run it in like production, but I wouldn't really recommend that. And then, I guess, last but not least, Rails assets. This has been actually pretty great. What this is doing is that all the browser dependencies that you can have that you want to include into your repository. So what it's doing is going to actually push those things up to Rails assets org, which is just like Ruby gems. So if you start Rails assets Angular, it's going to include that specific version of Angular, and you can specify which version you want. Just one caveat with this is the first time you do a bundle install, it's actually not going to work. The second time it will, because if it doesn't exist yet on the server, it's actually going to create it. So because it's synchronous. But again, if you're doing those dependencies updates as a front-end developer, if you just do it once locally, it's actually going to work for everybody else on your team as well. So with that, I just want to conclude. I think it just really depends on what you want as a team. I gave a couple of tools here. So I just would say, yeah, choose the things that make sense for your team. And yeah, I hope you learned something from it. And these are a couple of great resources. Definitely check them out. A lot of them have only been written in the last 3-4 weeks. There's a lot of people thinking about these. And I will be posting the slides later on as well on my Twitter account. It's called The Buzz. So thank you so much. Any questions?
Yeah. So for some of those gems, which obviously kind of have npm dependencies, would the gems handle installing the node modules, or do you have to still have your package.json?
Well, you would make that part of gulp, basically, right? So where you actually do that installation on the gulp side. So that's the reason why we've been able to do that clean separation. And yeah, and when you're doing the actual npm install, when you do a bundle install, it's going to execute those. I think that was the question. So yeah.
Okay. So if you're just a pure Rails developer, you don't have to.
Yes, that's it. And that was the big thing for backend developers. They prefer not to get involved too much with the front end, and I think that was totally reasonable. So that's the reason why we had some kind of mix. We still want our app to work for them. So. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So if you were starting like a brand new project, which of the three would you use? Two?
What was that?
If you had a brand new project you were starting, would you use
yes.
two? Option two?
Yes. Yes. And the thing is, I think we're moving slowly into going for two, especially like some of the gems that we were using that have a dependency on the SS pipeline. We're trying to move away from those and actually put those in separate projects, which makes way more sense.
Could you put the resource slide back up?
Oh, yeah, sure, yes. No more questions? All right, thank you so much.